Hi everyone, thanks Steph. Welcome to our session today. Firstly, I'll be talking about how ISO standards can support ESG. So we'll be running through a number of areas today with the purpose to demonstrate how ISO guidance documents can support with ESG and how your certifiable management systems can act as building blocks under that ESG umbrella. So we'll be covering briefly what is ESG, the purposes and benefits of ESG, how ISO 26000 specifically, the guidance on social responsibility, can help in relation to ESG, and within that covering specifically the principles and core subjects, as well as integration of this guidance, including materiality aspects. Then we'll be moving on to how the ISO high-level structure and specific certifiable ISO standards can support ESG, and we're aiming to sort of give some clause-by-clause examples across different standards to support this. So ESG stands for environment, social and governance. It's applicable to all organisations. These three areas are commonly referred to as pillars. However, it's important to take a holistic approach when looking at ESG because all these pillars have interdependencies that need to be considered. The term ESG often comes up in the same conversation as sustainability and corporate social responsibility, or CSR. However, while sustainability and CSR function more as like philosophies or end goals, ESG is more tangible. It encompasses data and metrics needed to inform decision making for companies and investors alike. So some of the purposes and benefits of ESG include risk mitigation. So companies that prioritise ESG factors tend to be better equipped to manage risks related to environmental impact, social issues and governance practices. And companies that integrate ESG analysis alongside financial factors, they tend to gain a more holistic understanding of the risks and opportunities being faced by their organisation. Access to investment. So sustainable investment funds and institutional investors often favour organisations with strong ESG performance. So ESG conscious organisations tend to attract a broader pool of investors. Next, we have innovation. So ESG encourages innovation by promoting new technologies, products and services. Companies that adapt to changing environmental and social demands can gain a competitive advantage in this area. It works to enhance reputation, demonstrating that commitment to responsible practices works to improve an organisation's reputation. There's also practical operational cost savings that can be achieved through the implementation of ESG, whether that's implementing like energy efficient practices or waste reduction, sustainable supply chain management. They can all be activities that lead to cost savings. And finally, creating that long-term value. So by considering environmental impact, social responsibility and governance practices, businesses can create like sustainable value over time. So there's some of the main sort of benefits of ESG. So how can ISO guidance standards help in relation to ESG? So we've picked specifically ISO 26000, which is the guidance on social responsibility to talk about today, as this is the most applicable ISO guidance currently in relation to ESG as a whole topic. So it's important to say that these guidance documents are not like certifiable standards like 9001 or 14001, because their aim is to offer that guidance. So as a result, they contain more practical information and examples that can be a great resource. These guidance documents have sort of multiple ways that they can be applied or uses. So they can be used to establish your initial ESG strategy. It sort of works by giving you like a starting point to hook into this really broad topic. They can also help the development of existing ESG strategy because they provide a comprehensive list of different core subjects and issues for consideration, which may have been overlooked in the sort of creation of that initial strategy. And they are also, they've been specifically designed to be used in conjunction with other voluntary frameworks, whether it's sort of a broad framework like the Global Reporting Initiative or the UN Global Compact, or even more focused frameworks on certain areas or topics like the ETI base code, the Ethical Trading Initiative base code, sort of linked to the SEDEX platform and SMETA audits, or FSC and PFC linked to timber. So because of that consideration, they can be used to help develop existing strategy, even if other frameworks have been used in creating that. They can also help with integration of ESG, whether new or existing, to ensure practices are embedded into operations and decision making. And this will help make ESG activities more efficient, and in turn can increase your positive impact in terms of achieving your objectives or the results that you wish. And then finally, they're just a great training resource because, as I said, they're not like certifiable standards. They include a lot of detail with practical examples and actions that could be taken. So there's a lot of subject areas covered under the ESG umbrella. And so especially clause 6 of this guidance can be used as that training resource. So here we have an overarching diagram of the structure of ISO 26000, which we'll revisit throughout the presentation to help understand how it all fits together, because the structure is different, again, to certifiable systems. The key underpinning aspects of the guidance are detailed on the left. This includes clause 3, which provides background information on the important factors that have influenced the development of social responsibility and continue to affect its nature and how it's practiced. And it also describes the concept of social responsibility itself, what it means and how it applies to organisations. It's also worth noting that within clause 3, there is specific guidance for SMEs, considering sort of practical, simple, cost-efficient actions, and building on their strengths, because in relation to the strengths that SMEs have in terms of flexibility and innovation, which do provide particularly good opportunities for social responsibility in practice. So there's specific guidance within that clause. Another input is clause 4, which explains the 7 underpinning principles of social responsibility, which we'll go into now. So the 7 underpinning principles are accountability, transparency, ethical behaviour, respect for stakeholders' interests, respect for the rule of law, respect for international norms of behaviour, and respect for human rights. These can be used to create meaningful initial policy on which to build your strategy. And these simply should be used to underpin business decisions and activities. And they apply across different ESG frameworks. There's ways you can tangibly demonstrate commitment to these principles through your business decisions and activities. So, for example, like the respect for the rule of law in ISO 14001 and 45001, there's explicit requirements to identify your compliance obligations and to evaluate your compliance against those. So those activities in your certified management system go towards demonstrating your organisation's commitment to keeping abreast of developing legislation and maintaining your compliance in those areas. And so that can tangibly demonstrate these principles in action. sort of one theme of the presentation today would be that no one will be doing nothing in relation to ESG. Everyone will have existing projects, processes, governing principles or values for the organisation they work for that will contribute to a more formal ESG strategy. It's just looking at it from that different perspective. So in ISO 26000 clause 6, this then goes further in explaining the core subjects and associated issues relating to social responsibility. For each core subject, information has been provided on its scope, its relationship to social responsibility as a whole, relevant principles and considerations organisations can take, and related actions and expectations. So again, these are like the practical examples of what organisations could or should do in these areas. This clause of the guidance supports organisations to better understand the ESG underpinning principles and the specific core subjects as they relate to their organisation specifically and to each other. In the field of ESG specifically versus the ISO standards world, these core subjects could commonly be referred to as material topics, to use the language, and they would be considered as part of the materiality assessment process, which we'll be going into later in the presentation. So the 7 core subjects that ISO 26000 introduces are organisational governance, human rights, labour practices, the environment, fair operating practices, consumer issues, and community involvement and development. So every core subject, but not necessarily every sub-issue listed under the core subject, will be applicable to your organisation. And that's how the guidance has been designed. So these top level core subjects will be applicable to every organisation in some form, but the sub-issues, there may be specific aspects which aren't relevant. Some of it will be more obvious than others based on your sector. So for example, if you work in like the construction sector, then labour practices and the environment will clearly be significant core issues because of the use of materials in that sector and the industrial nature of work sites. Whereas if you're in, say, a law or an insurance firm, then fair operating practices and human rights would probably be more significant. Or for information technology or marketing sectors, then consumer issues would sort of become at a higher level of significance. So clause 6, where the core issues are detailed, this is the meat of the guidance document, which is a great training and awareness resource for these different complex individual topics of ESG, and especially how they interlink. So using this guidance will help organisations identify aspects of ESG that they may have previously not considered due to normally the initial focus of developing a strategy is on the clearly significant areas for an organisation. So it's important to note that there may be individual issues under these core subjects that might not be very relevant to a sector, but are very relevant to you as an individual organisation because of your different operations or unique characteristics of your operations. So it's good to view it from a focus standpoint. My breakout workshop later today will be digging into these core subjects a little bit further in terms of materiality. So this diagram again comes from the guidance document, and it is just to emphasize the importance to approaching ESG as that umbrella under which existing policy, process and management systems will fall and contribute to collective impact. And again, how these issues do have interdependencies, and it's important to take that holistic approach when reviewing them. So for example, the core subject labour practices, that's divided into 5 sub-issues. You have employment and employment relationships, conditions of work and social protection, social dialogue, health and safety at work, and human development and training in the workplace. And then the core subject of the environment is divided into 4 sub-issues: prevention of pollution, sustainable resource use, climate change mitigation and adaptation, and the protection of environment, biodiversity, and restoration of natural habitats. So from just seeing those 2 core subjects broken down, you can see how an ESG strategy or initiative undertaken by an organisation may impact multiple factors. So, for example, again, if you were in, say, manufacturing or construction and you were working on chemical innovation to replace existing substances with less hazardous alternatives, that would have a positive impact for both health and safety at work under the labour practices core subject, as well as the prevention of pollution under the environmental heading. And these activities may already be taking place because they support certain compliance obligations in different areas. So, for example, the control of substances has health regulations in the UK. So taking that holistic approach and an integrated approach is really vital for ESG, because one activity can fulfill multiple requirements, and so it's making that effort and that resource that you're putting into that activity work harder for you in terms of positive impact and maximizing that. So yeah, it's just to say that for clause 6 and the core subjects, for organisations who have a newly established ESG strategy, it is likely that not all these elements have been given full consideration, and as the system matures, these areas may be the areas that offer you those opportunities to drive continual improvement. So in terms of integration of ISO 26000, clause 5 addresses 2 fundamental practices of social responsibility. So it's an organisation's recognition of its own social responsibility, and its identification of and engagement with its stakeholders. So this clause provides guidance on the relationship between an organisation, its stakeholders, and society, on recognising the core subjects and issues of social responsibility, and on an organisation's sphere of influence. So ISO 26000 directly supports ESG materiality assessments. So materiality refers to the significance of an issue or information in the context of decision making. It is a concept used to determine which topics are the most relevant and impactful to an organisation and its stakeholders. And materiality is designed to help organisations focus on what truly matters by identifying and prioritising the issues that have the greatest effect on their performance or their reputation, their overall success, really. A materiality assessment is crucial and definitely the starting point for any organisation in creating that meaningful and successful ESG strategy, because it reveals and helps prioritise the topics that strategy should focus on and report on. The quality of materiality assessments can range wildly, and this is where referring to the core subjects and issues listed in the ISO 26000 guidance can help ensure a comprehensive identification of potential significant material topics which may not have previously been considered. And then it also provides the key steps, which is what's shown on screen here, of that materiality process. The output of this is normally a materiality matrix, which will plot these issues on a grid, allowing companies to assess and prioritise to determine the significant issues that warrant attention and disclosure in their reporting. Another key consideration is people. So as you've seen from the list of core subjects, it covers a wide range of topics which won't be owned by a single individual within an organisation. but instead probably across multiple departments or roles. So, for example, consumer issues tend to be owned in a marketing role, human rights in HR, labour practices, it could be a health and safety manager or an operations role. So the starting point is to ensure that these individuals understand their roles and responsibilities in relation to an organisation's ESG strategy and their impact on it. If ESG is an umbrella under which all these different activities sit, then you need someone to hold that umbrella. So a central person who can bring together updates, metrics, information from these responsible individuals or departments into an organisation-wide reportable format, which can be reviewed by leadership. This role generally falls to a technical or a compliance role, as they tend to already have established like multiple cross-departmental working relationships because of what they do. In larger organisations, this can also be done by a committee or a board, if there's more human resource. This umbrella holder, whether it's an individual or a committee, needs to really be a promoter for the ESG strategy. So it's very important to find your sort of eco warriors, your safety champions, your social justice advocates, but individuals whose like personal principles align with the principles we discussed earlier. And then ISO 26000 Clause 7 provides guidance on integrating social responsibility. It provides guidance for putting social responsibility into practice in the organisation. So if Clause 6 is providing information to increase awareness and knowledge of these different issues, Clause 7 is about providing practical guidance in relation to how to embed them into day-to-day operations, based on that strong understanding, or that stronger understanding and awareness of the organisation's activities and impacts on the issues covered in Clause 6. So once you've identified the material issues and assessed their impact and significance, it's crucial to integrate them into your decision making. You're embedding them into different consideration, having different ESG considerations in relation to strategic planning, risk management, investment decisions, and day-to-day operations. It ensures a systematic approach to addressing these material issues. This integration facilitates the identification of opportunities, the mitigation of risks, and the creation of long-term value for the organisation and its stakeholders. So, like for example, if you're developing like an R&D program, you may decide to embed sustainable developments into it and test products or processes that would use less energy or less natural resources, or be more modular and repairable or recyclable, or even develop additional services where you would set up repair schemes or return schemes. It could be from the social side when you're setting up supplier reviews, you implement checks against employment agencies that could be used to mitigate modern slavery risks, for example. So there's different ways how this can look in practice, and it'll be very much dependent on your organisation, what has been deemed relevant and significant for yourself, and what influence you have. And it's important to say that the guidance documents also have an underpinning principle of continual improvement, like the certifiable management systems do. There isn't an activity with a finish line. It is a cycle, not a linear activity. So to summarise Clause 7, it provides guidance on putting social responsibility into practice, and it includes specific guidance relating to understanding that social responsibility of an organisation, integrating it throughout, communications relating to social responsibility, improving the credibility of an organisation regarding social responsibility, reviewing progress and improving performance, and it also has guidance on evaluating different voluntary initiatives for social responsibility and voluntary frameworks through the annex. It isn't a comprehensive list, but it is a good summary of different frameworks that are available. This guidance on credibility and ESG reporting is important because ESG reporting is where it varies a little bit from the certifiable management system requirements, because it's where companies disclose relevant information about their performance and impact in the three areas. And its purpose is to provide stakeholders, including the general public, so it's an external document, as well as investors, customers, employees, with transparent and comprehensive insights into how a company manages and integrates sustainability and social considerations into its business operations. It's a snapshot of the current position against targets and also looking forward and communicating like the next activities that are planned. As companies continue to gather data and mature their ESG strategy, then they will have the benefit of being able to reassess their strategies over time, acknowledge the strong areas and continue what's been working and maybe expand that, but also note weaker areas and take next steps in the right direction to improve those. So in terms of ESG and ESG reporting, some sort of key takeaways would be, in my opinion, it's a matter of when, not if. As Joe's session later will show, there are certain mandated ESG reporting requirements coming in, and the trend with sort of sustainable or environmental legislation is it comes in a small scope, whether that's a sector or size of an organisation, and then that scope gets expanded, is the general trend. Or it comes in as a information requirement and then gets mandated to a performance requirement. And so it's a case of when, not if. So using this international guidance as a baseline, it can help you approach this sort of little and often now, as opposed to waiting for it to become mandated to everyone. You will not be starting from square one. That you'll be doing, especially if you have different certifiable management systems in place already, there'll be a lot of good work that is already happening, already in place, that will fulfill requirements under the ESG umbrella. It is just taking a different view on it sometimes. It'll take a village. There's a lot of topics covered. No one can be an expert in everything. And having that central role, that umbrella holder to help pull together that data can really help as well, because it's very easy for it to become inefficient. And so it's that type of central role is really important. Don't let the want of perfection stop progress. It's a case of going in the right direction, and then driving, working on that and continually improving is the right step to take. So don't let perfection stop progress, and prioritize. It's so easy with such a broad topic. I've been guilty of it in previous roles where you want to do everything, and there's never enough hours in the day, is there? So it's a case of, it's better to take 10 steps on one high priority topic and get to a result, get to a positive impact that's tangible, than take one step on 10 topics and don't get to any of your end goals. So prioritization on this really broad topic is so important. Just like your management system standards, build it in, don't add it on. If it gets added on, then it has the risk of falling off when things get busy, deadlines get tight. We're all human, so if it's built into business as usual, then it will be more effective, and it will just be a much more robust process. And again, it's a cycle, very much like the certifiable management systems in terms of the plan, do, check, act cycle that we all know, and that drive for continual improvement. ESG has that same underpinning driver of continual improvement. And Blackmores is here to help. We whether it's alignment with guidance documents or certifying against management systems for those building blocks under it. So The next portion of today is looking at how the ISO high-level structure can help, and specific certifiable ISO standards can help. So I've tried to do an overview here of the common ISO standards and how they can help on different aspects of ESG, because it's a very wide topic with and so there are very different areas that it can help with. So firstly, ISO 9001 for quality management. Now, the applicability of ISO 9001 under ESG will be affected by what your organization does, because it is the business management system. But there are some general clauses that support governance factors under ESG. So, for example, clause 8.4 around the control of external providers can be used in relation to the ISO 26001 core subject fair operating practices and the sub-issues of promoting social responsibility in the value chain or fair competition. So these government aspects there. Also, there's clause 8.5.3, which is regarding property belonging to customers or external providers, and that can support fair operating practices, ensuring the respect of property rights. So there are different aspects of 9001 in clause 8 that can support the governance aspects, but its applicability will depend on what your organisation does. So next we have ISO 45001, and this strongly supports the S pillar. So specifically in relation to human rights, fundamental principles and rights to work, and labour practices, social dialogue, and health and safety at work. So the S pillar of ESG and 45001 are very strongly aligned in the areas of occupational health and safety. Then we have ISO 27001 for information security. This can support the G and the S pillars, but it's more G. And this is in respect to, again, fair operating practices and consumer issues about consumer data protection and privacy, the respect for property rights, but from a intellectual electronic property perspective. So so ISO 27001 can support from the G perspective. And this is through sort of various controls in the standard. So control 5.34 about privacy and protection of PII. Control 5.35 and data masking, 5.36 data leakage prevention, 5.32 intellectual property rights. So these controls in the annex of 27001 can support in this area. And then finally, we have the two environmental management system standards. So you have 50,001 for energy management and 14,001 for environment. And again, these directly support the environmental core subjects and the environmental pillar, as you would expect. But there are indirect benefits in relation to the S and governance pillars in relation to people impacts from environmental topics and environmental governance specifically. And for 14,001, this is achieved because of the alignment between the aims of that standard and, again, the issues under the environment. So the prevention of pollution, climate change mitigation, these are directly compatible underpinning ideas. So there are more standards than what we have time to discuss today that support ESG. So some other ones I just wanted to touch upon. There's also ISO 37001, which is the anti-bribery management system standard. And then there's also ISO 20400, which is a guidance document like 26,000 that focuses on sustainable procurement and how to embed sustainability considerations into the procurement function of your business, which again, the underpinning core subjects and principles are shared with 26,000. So again, they are very complementary. So following on from this, we're going to go clause by clause of that high level structure and how it can support ESG. So clause 4 supports ESG, and as with ISO 26001 clause 5, clause 4, the context of the organisation works to support ESG materiality assessments on relevant topics to the certifiable standard. So like we discussed there, so if you had 14,001 the E pillar, if you had 45,001 the S pillar in those topics, by ensuring that the organisation is considered and is aware of internal and external issues, as well as interested parties and their needs and expectations. So it can help materiality in that sense. And then in terms of clause 5, this really supports the governance pillar because it ensures that leadership commitment, that overarching policy, clearly defined roles and responsibilities, and it also, again, supports tangible evidence of the underpinning principles of accountability and transparency. So again, it's a case of if you're pulling in different topics into your existing processes here, then you can broaden the impact of these processes that you have just from your management system. So in terms of like 9001 is your business management system, I always say. So it's a case of if certain ESG topics are very impactful to your organisation, you can pull it into those 9001 processes that you have in place because of these clauses, and it will support your materiality assessing and governance in those areas because leadership are required to be involved. So in the case of ISO 45001, there is additional clause in subclause in clause 5 around the consultation and participation of workers. And this supports social governance in relation to health and safety at work and social dialogue, due to this being an explicit requirement to have that consultation process with workers at all levels. So again, this can work to support that social pillar and those core subjects explicitly. So generally speaking, clause 5 supports governance, decision-making processes and structures as well. So clause 6, so planning requires organisations to understand their significant risks and opportunities and in whatever the necessary format is for the subject matter. So this is where there is variation between the standards, obviously. But this does in turn support ESG materiality assessments that we touched on earlier, because the data from these processes can be inputted into a central broader ESG materiality assessment. So again, you won't be starting from scratch when it comes to doing an ESG materiality assessment, because you will have already done that risk assessing activity for specific areas, whether it's energy, whether it's safety, environment, in these functions. So it's important that these could be used, either the content or even the format or process that you undergo. So the group of people that undertake this assessment for the organisation could be the starting point of expanding that into an ESG materiality assessment. And then in terms of the specific requirements in 14 and 45 about compliance obligations, we mentioned previously, this again supports the social responsibility principles of respect for the rule of law and work as a governance aspect in terms of making sure that compliance is monitored, identified and monitored. So in clause 7, competency and awareness is addressed in relation to management system activities. And these will cover ESG activities in part and give a framework, at least for ESG competency and awareness to be managed, or the process that manages it. And this really supports the credibility of the ESG strategy that you're going to create by ensuring the individuals creating it are competent and aware of the relevant ESG aspects applicable to their role and the management system standard. And then in this clause, we go further into communication and documented information. So, for example, in 14,001 within clause 7, it states that environmental information communicated is consistent with information generated within the EMS and is reliable. So this can work to help evidence that you're avoiding greenwashing and again increase the credibility of ESG reporting on these environmental topics. And documented information across all the standards again can help support that transparency of ESG reporting claims, because if you control certain data and certain information, then you can evidence where your final report data comes from. And so having that system in place to control certain key documented information can support ESG in that sense and really help that transparency. So for clause 8, this is where it does vary, as you would expect. So for example, the operational clause of 14,001 supports the organisation in improving environmental performance, which is the same overarching objective as the environmental pillar. 45,001, the S pillar, like we mentioned. But their inclusion of emergency preparedness and life cycle perspective again supports making sure that your ESG is comprehensive. It's thinking of the full spectrum of operational activities are being considered and included within your operational controls, not just day-to-day business as usual, without considering those potentially high impact events in like an emergency like a fire or a flood, or even up or downstream aspects, sort of like raw material acquisition, end of life disposal and management. So again, those types of clauses are introducing that broadest perspective where you're thinking of your impact beyond your physical walls. And so again, that can help support ESG performance in different areas. There are different operational requirements in ISO 9001 and 50,001 for the energy management around design and procurement processes. And these can support innovation under the ESG umbrella. And this is where using sort of ISO 20400 sustainable procurement guidance can be used to develop procurement controls within your 9001 system, or any management system, to be fair. But yeah, so again, this is where you can use the guidance within a certifiable standard to align certain aspects with these requirements and still keep it under that umbrella. And then for ISO 27001, there is again sort of procurement and design aspects in relation to sort of information security and secure development, which again can help with ensuring sort of that personal data security within those functions as well, and ensure that innovation is maintaining those controls. So clause 9, performance evaluation. So this is a critical part of management system standards when it comes to aligning with ESG, because ESG has that strong focus on quantifiable metrics. So this clause does not only support ESG reporting based on data, but also ESG strategy KPIs that can be aligned with this clause under the previous core subjects mentioned. So it's a case of, if you have KPIs under your EMS, most likely those KPIs will be very good KPIs under that E pillar for an ESG strategy. If you have KPIs under your safety management system, they will be very good KPIs for the S. If you have KPIs around your compliance evaluation or your R&D program, or human resources, say, they will probably be quite good under the S and the G pillars. So it's a case of, again, you won't be starting from scratch, especially if you have that certified management system. And again, having things like the internal audit process, it can support that credibility of that ESG strategy and reporting, the fact that you have those checks and measures in place. And again, the specific requirements around compliance evaluation supports that respect for the rule of law. And then specifically ISO 9001 has this requirement for reviewing customer satisfaction and having that customer focus. And this can be directly linked to the consumer issues core subject, and specifically the sub-issue of consumer service, support, complaint and dispute resolution. So again, there's specific elements of different standards that are very strongly linked to specific sub-issues of the core subjects listed in ISO 26001. And then finally, clause 10 improvement, as well as clause 6.2 objectives I've popped in here, because again, they can work to back that ESG strategy targets and objectives in relation to the relevant pillar. Because under the management system standards, they have to be measurable objectives and set by the leadership team to mitigate risk, maximise opportunity, enhance performance in key areas. And so these can and should be used with it under the sort of ESG umbrella. So yeah, it was a case of what Rachel's going to touch on in her session later is a format of how to do this, which is a scorecard format. It's not the only way of doing it, but again, it's trying to control these very broad topics and make the objectives tangible and smart objectives, really. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague Eddie now to talk you through the isologyhub. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Alison. And yeah, good morning, everyone. Yeah, thanks again, Alison, for that presentation. Really, really informative and really, really interesting. So yeah, thanks for joining, everyone. Just wanted to very briefly touch on the isologyhub. So just as an introduction, I'm the isologyhub account manager here at Blackmores. So it's obviously my role and responsibility to talk about this platform and just to give you sort of an update on what we're doing with it at the moment. So just for those of you that don't know, the isologyhub is the leading platform for organizations really wishing to improve their knowledge and skills surrounding ISO standards. So it's something that we have created in-house. It's all created by our consultants, such as like Alison. So it's all, really up-to-date content and really, really useful. So within the platform, we offer training and development surrounding the high majority of all ISO standards. We really give you the tools and information to succeed in understanding and developing your ISO management system yourselves. So the isologyhub contains resources that you can see there, such as learner pathways. So taking users from very much a beginner stage all the way to what we refer to as a leader. So, being able to continue to manage their system once it's in place. We also give you insights and access to our roadmap. So that's our actual process and methodology, which we've honed and crafted over many years, which all of our consultants do follow for implementing ISO standards. And that process and methodology, that really has 100% success rate when working with our consultants. So the fact we've given you that within the platform is a massive asset there as well. So we look to add new content to our platform every month, and we look to average around 3 to 4 pieces of new content per month. What that additionally means is that we are a user-orientated platform, meaning that we really thrive on our users suggesting new content that they want and shaping the platform and learning journeys moving forward. Ultimately, every ISO standard requires a good degree of knowledge throughout the company. And that's for every individual concerning the management system or systems that they have in place. So, the isologyhub, therefore, is a great tool to implement within your business, both from, just compliance reasons, but additionally for your own personal development, both surrounding knowledge and career progression. So if we could just move on to the next slide, Alison, that'd be great. So we do have an offer at the moment for the isologyhub for all of our registrants today. Both if you're watching this on a maybe a recording later on, but if you're here in person at the moment. So you're entitled to a few things to redeem if you do sign up to the isologyhub, and that's before the 30th of April, so you've got a bit of time to look into that. So the things that you've got on offer there is a free online mandatory reporting requirements course. So that's actually with our sister company over at Carbonology. So I'll just give you a brief explanation of Carbonology and who they are. So as I mentioned, they are our sister company, and they're the leading specialists in carbon standards. So covering everything from carbon verification, greenhouse gas emissions, net zero pathways, and much, much more. So if you have any requirements surrounding carbon related compliance or verification, then they are really your go-to experts. We also have Joe Leggett on the call here today, who's one of the carbonologists at Carbonology, who will be leading one of the breakout workshops later today. If you don't get a chance to speak to Joe today, don't worry. You can always contact myself or any of the presenters here today. We can always put you in touch with the right people over at Carbonology. But the first thing that we've got there is that online mandatory reporting requirements course, which will be led by them. We've then got a free ESG review session, which will be conducted by myself and maybe my colleague Ross Algar as well. So that's where we'll just review what you've currently doing with ESG and maybe how that's relating to the ISO standards that you're maybe considering or that you've already got in place. So we'll do a full review with you on that. You've then got access to a net zero in 90 days planner, again from our colleagues over at Carbonology. So that's sort of a step-by-step guide into looking at a net zero pathway. You've got an ESG isologyhub catalogue. So we've actually spent a bit of time previous to the session today actually collating essentially a course catalogue for the isologyhub, which is specifically in relation to ESG and surrounding what ESG standards have that in relation to and what learning you can look at in relation to that. And then finally there you've got a free personalized demo of the isologyhub from myself. So feel free to get in contact with me directly after the session really, and we can look to book you in a demo, obviously probably wanting to do that before the 30th of April, as that's the offer you can see on the right there as well. So in addition to all of that, if we do look to move forward before the 30th of April, you will receive an exclusive 2-for-1 annual membership to the isologyhub. And yeah, as you can see, that offer does have a RRP, a standard of circa £1,000. So a really, really great offer. And yeah, hope to see you some of you redeeming that after the session itself.